London, 1837. The Duke's hand is up for grabs, but his eyes are only on one woman. The 100 royal beauties, each more stunning than the last, waltz across the ballroom floor, their eyes locked on Duke Edmund Hawthorne, ready to claim the title of Duchess. But Edmund isn't watching them. His eyes are fixed on someone else, Lila, the invisible maid with no title to offer. With every glance she steals, the tension builds. He's supposed to marry for duty. She's supposed to remain out of sight. But when their eyes meet across the ballroom, the entire room goes silent. What will Edmund do when the only woman he wants isn't the one he's expected to marry? Tonight, everything changes. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The grand ball begins. The cravat felt like a noose. Duke Edmund Hawthorne stood before the gilt-edged mirror in his chambers, watching his valet's practiced hands make the final adjustments to his formal attire. The black tailcoat sat heavy across his shoulders, perfectly tailored, immaculately pressed, and suffocating in its perfection. Every brass button gleamed, every seam lay precise. He looked every inch the Duke of Hawthorne, which was precisely the problem. "Tonight, Edmund," his mother's voice echoed in his mind from their conversation that morning, her tone brooking no argument. "You must choose tonight. The family's alliances depend on it. The tenants depend on it. Your father," she hadn't needed to finish. His father's memory hung between them always, a weight Edmund had carried since he was 22 years old. "The Hawthorne name means something, my son." His father's voice was weaker in memory than it had been in life, ravaged by the illness that had taken him too soon. Edmund could still see him in that bed, once strong hands clutching the coverlet. "We are stewards, not just of land and title, but of the people who depend on us. Every choice you make affects hundreds of lives. Promise me you'll remember that. Promise me you'll do your duty." Edmund had promised. He'd been promising ever since. "Your Grace," Thomas, his valet, stepped back with an approving nod. "You're ready." Ready. What a peculiar word for walking into a ballroom filled with 100 women he'd never met, all vying to become his duchess. Ready implied preparation, control. Edmund felt neither. He descended the grand staircase, his footsteps muffled by thick carpet, and paused at the landing overlooking the ballroom. Below, the spectacle was already underway, the pre-ball chaos that guests would never see. Servants moved in, orchestrated frenzy, making final adjustments to flower arrangements that cascaded from every surface. The chandeliers blazed with what must have been 1,000 candles, their light refracting through crystal prisms into dancing rainbows across the pristine marble floor. And there, in the center of it all, on her knees with a scrub brush, was a young woman he didn't recognize. Lila Harrington had been working in the Hawthorne household for 3 years, though Edmund would have been hard-pressed to recall her name if asked that morning. She was simply part of the machinery that kept the estate running invisible, as good servants were meant to be. But something made him pause now. Perhaps it was the efficiency of her movements, the way her capable hands worked the brush in steady, practiced circles. Or perhaps it was the moment when a younger maid, barely more than a child, stumbled past with an enormous vase of hothouse roses, clearly overwhelmed. Lila looked up immediately. "Annie, wait." Her voice was low, kind. She rose smoothly, setting aside her brush, and took one side of the heavy vase. "Come on then." Together, they carried it to its pedestal, the younger girl's face flooded with relief. Lila squeezed her shoulder briefly before returning to her scrubbing, as if the interruption had been nothing at all. Edmund found himself noting details he had no business noticing. The way a few dark curls had escaped her cap, the calm competence in her expression, the fact that she seemed entirely unbothered by the chaos swirling around her. While others rushed and fretted, she simply worked. "Edmund," his mother's voice, sharp now, pulled him from his observation. The Dowager Duchess of Hawthorne materialized at his elbow, resplendent in deep purple silk that matched her steely determination. "Stop lurking. Our guests will arrive within the hour." "I'm not lurking. I'm observing." "You're avoiding." But her expression softened slightly, one gloved hand touching his sleeve. "I know this isn't easy, but your father—" "I know what father wanted." The words came out sharper than he'd intended. He softened his tone. "I know what's expected, Mother. I'll do my duty." Something flickered in her eyes, concern perhaps, or regret, but it vanished beneath her practiced composure. "I only want you to be happy, Edmund. A good match can bring both duty and happiness." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They both knew she was wrong. Duty and happiness were two horses pulling in opposite directions, and tonight he would choose the path that led away from his own desires and toward the future his title demanded. The guests began arriving precisely at 8 o'clock. Edmund stood in the receiving line, his face aching from maintaining a pleasant expression as his chamberlain announced each arrival with theatrical flourish. Lady Isabella Worthington, daughter of the Earl of Somerset, with a dowry of £40,000 and connections to the shipping industry. And on it went. 100 women, each more spectacular than the last, each representing alliances, wealth, political advantage. The ballroom filled with the rustle of silk and satin, the glitter of diamonds and sapphires, the overwhelming cloud of competing perfumes rose, and jasmine and something cloying that made Edmund's eyes water. Lady Catherine Ashford, daughter of Viscount Ashford, renowned for her beauty and accomplishments in watercolor painting. Lady Catherine was indeed beautiful, golden-haired, blue-eyed, with the kind of delicate features that belonged in a portrait. She curtsied with practiced grace, her smile sweet and vacant as summer sky. "Your Grace, what an honor." Edmund bowed. "Lady Catherine, welcome to Hawthorne Estate." She giggled. Actually giggled. He was 28 years old, and she was giggling at him. Lady Margaret Thornton, daughter of Baron Thornton, educated at the finest academies and fluent in 4 languages. Lady Margaret was handsome rather than beautiful, with sharp features and sharper eyes. When she curtsied, she held his gaze directly assessing, calculating. "Your Grace, I've read extensively about your agricultural innovations. I'd be delighted to discuss crop rotation techniques at your convenience." Well, that was different, at least. "I'd be happy to, Lady Margaret." Lady Vivienne Blackwell, daughter of the late Earl of Blackwell, heiress to the Blackwell fortune and renowned for her wit and charm. When Lady Vivienne rose from her curtsy, Edmund felt the calculation in her gaze, even as her smile radiated warmth. She was stunning, dark-haired, dark-eyed, with the kind of beauty that drew every eye in the room. But it was her intelligence that struck him most. Here was a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and exactly how to get it. "Your Grace," her voice was pitched perfectly, not too eager, not too cool. "Thank you for this opportunity. I'm sure the evening will be illuminating." There was something in the way she said it, as if she could already see the future and was merely waiting for everyone else to catch up. The orchestra struck up a waltz as the final guests arrived. Edmund led Lady Catherine to the floor for the first dance, as protocol demanded. She was light in his arms, speaking breathlessly about the weather, the flowers, the magnificence of the estate. He made appropriate responses while his mind wandered. Over her shoulder, he caught glimpses of the servants maintaining the spectacle, refreshing champagne, adjusting candles, ensuring everything ran seamlessly. And there, moving through the shadows along the wall, was the young woman from earlier, Leela. She carried a tray of empty glasses, her movements economical and sure. She was no longer in her work dress but in the simple black uniform all the serving staff wore, plain, unadorned, designed to help her fade into the background. Yet something about her presence drew his eye again and again. The dance with Lady Catherine ended. He moved to Lady Margaret next, then to a Lady Caroline, someone whose name he immediately forgot. Each woman blurred into the next, all accomplishments and practiced charm, all performing the elaborate dance of courtship with varying degrees of skill. Lady Vivienne proved the most engaging. When his duty brought him to her side, she surprised him with genuine conversation. "Tell me, Your Grace, do you enjoy these spectacles, or do you find them as exhausting as I do?" He hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. "They serve a purpose, diplomatic." Her smile was knowing. "I'll take that as exhausting then. Don't worry, your secret is safe with me." She was clever, dangerously so. She would make an excellent duchess, he thought distantly. She understood the game and played it better than anyone in the room. But even as they danced, even as she charmed and maneuvered with expert precision, Edmund's gaze kept drifting to the periphery. Lila was collecting glasses near the refreshment table when it happened. Her practical shoes, so different from the delicate slippers of the guests, caught on the edge of a carpet. She stumbled, the tray tilting dangerously. Edmund's breath caught. 100 expensive crystal glasses about to shatter across the marble floor. The humiliation, the disruption. But Lila recovered with a dancer's grace, rebalancing the tray in one smooth motion, not a single glass falling. The movement was so quick, so efficient, that hardly anyone noticed, except Edmund. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, just for a moment, just long enough for him to see that her expression held neither the awe he was accustomed to nor the ambition he'd seen in every other woman tonight. Just a flicker of something he couldn't quite name, curiosity perhaps, or mild surprise at being caught in a private moment. Then she looked away and continued walking, disappearing through the servants' entrance as if nothing had happened. "Your Grace?" Lady Vivienne's voice pulled him back. "You seem distracted. Forgive me." He forced his attention back to his dance partner, to the role he was meant to play, merely ensuring everything runs smoothly. Of course, but something in her expression suggested she'd noticed exactly where his attention had wandered and filed that information away for future use. The evening stretched on, dance after dance, conversation after conversation, each woman more accomplished than the last. They all blurred together into a sea of silk and perfume and practiced smiles. The only moments of clarity came when he caught glimpses of the young maid moving through the shadows, her presence somehow more real than all the performed perfection surrounding him. As midnight approached and the orchestra showed no signs of stopping, Edmund found himself tracking Lila's movement through the room, noting the efficiency with which she worked, the kindness she showed to other servants, the natural dignity she carried without seeming aware of it. He told himself it meant nothing. She was a servant. He was a duke. Tonight was about duty, about choosing a suitable bride who could help him fulfill the promises he'd made to his dying father. But as Lady Vivienne laughed at something he'd said, her hand resting possessively on his arm, Edmund's gaze drifted once more to the young woman in the simple black dress, and he felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd worn for 6 years, a question he'd never thought to ask. What if duty and desire didn't have to pull in opposite directions? What if the woman who caught his eye wasn't supposed to be invisible at all? Chapter 2. An unexpected encounter. Edmund couldn't breathe. The ballroom had become a prison of silk and perfume, the air thick with expectations and the cloying scent of too many flowers. Lady Catherine had cornered him near the punch bowl to discourse at length about the arrangement of the roses. Lady Margaret had quizzed him on tariff policy with the intensity of a parliamentary inquiry, and Lady Vivienne had been watching him with those dark, knowing eyes, as if she could read every thought that crossed his mind. He needed air. He needed silence. He needed to escape before he did something unforgivably rude, like fleeing his own ball. Edmund slipped through the terrace doors with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent his youth avoiding social obligations. The cool night air hit him like a benediction, and he sucked in a deep breath, his hands already working at his cravat. The silk unwound with blessed relief, and he loosened his collar, letting the breeze cool his overheated skin. The terrace overlooked the gardens, his mother's pride, though Edmund had always preferred the wilder woods beyond the manicured lawns. Moonlight painted everything silver and shadow, softening the rigid lines of the formal parterres into something almost mysterious. That's when he heard the voice. 100 women, and not one of them, asked him what he actually wanted. Just performed like trained birds, each one prettier than the last, each one more accomplished. Edmund froze. Someone was in the garden below, speaking in a low, wry tone that carried just enough to reach him. He stepped quietly to the balustrade and looked down. There, sitting on the low stone wall that bordered the rose garden, was Lila Harrington. She'd removed her practical shoes and was rubbing one stockinged foot with both hands, her face tilted toward the moon. Her cap had been discarded on the wall beside her, and those escaped curls he'd noticed earlier now framed her face in the moonlight. "Poor man probably feels like a prize bull at auction," she continued to herself, a habit of solitude. "Though, I suppose that's what comes of being born to all this. Still seems a dreadful way to find happiness. Then again, what do I know? I choose my shoes based on how long they'll last, not how they look at a ball." Despite everything, the weight of the evening, the pressure, the suffocating expectations, Edmund smiled. Then the smile became a chuckle, and before he could stop himself, he was laughing. Lila's head snapped up. Even from this distance, he could see her eyes widen in horror. "Please," Edmund called down, descending the terrace steps before she could flee. "Don't go. She was already reaching for her shoes, trying to stand, her face flushed with mortification. "Your Grace, I didn't realize I would never have. I know." He reached the bottom of the steps, holding up one hand in a gesture he hoped was reassuring. "That's rather the point, isn't it? You didn't know I was there, so you were being honest." Lila clutched her shoes to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting toward the servants' entrance, as if calculating her escape route. "I spoke out of turn. It was disrespectful. I apologize." It was refreshing. Edmund surprised himself with the admission. "Please, sit. You were rubbing your feet. They must ache after tonight." "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly." "Consider it an order, then, if that makes it easier." He gestured to the wall. "I won't have you standing on sore feet on my account." After a moment's hesitation, Lila sat, though she perched on the very edge of the wall as if ready to bolt at any moment. Her hands twisted the shoes in her lap, and she kept her gaze lowered in a way that suggested years of training in proper deference. Edmund leaned against the opposite wall, maintaining a respectful distance. "What's your name?" "Lila, Your Grace. Lila Harrington." "How long have you worked at Hawthorne Estate, Miss Harrington?" 3 years, Your Grace." Her voice was careful, measured. This wasn't the same person who'd been speaking so freely moments ago. Edmund tried a different approach. "You mentioned choosing shoes based on how long they'll last. Do you apply that philosophy to other decisions?" A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. "Most decisions, yes. When you've little margin for error, practicality matters more than appearance." "And you think I should apply the same logic to choosing a wife?" He kept his tone light, curious, rather than offended. Lila looked up then, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Hers were grey. He noticed the color of morning mist over the lake. "I think..." She paused, clearly weighing whether honesty would cost her position. Then something shifted in her expression, a small rebellion against propriety. "I think it seems a complicated way to choose a companion, Your Grace, like selecting a horse based on how it looks in parade, rather than how it handles the road." The laugh burst out of him again, genuine and surprised. When was the last time someone had been this direct with him? When was the last time someone had treated him like a person rather than a title? "You're not wrong," he admitted, "though I'm not sure my mother would appreciate the comparison." "Your mother wants the best for you." Lila's voice softened. "Even I can see that. She just sees best differently than you might." Edmund studied her curiously. "And how do you see it, Miss Harrington?" She looked away, back toward the moon-silvered garden. "I see the gardens in early morning, before anyone else is awake. There's a rose bush near the east wall, nothing special, not one of your mother's prized varieties, but it blooms faithfully every year. And the scent." She paused, as if surprised by her own poetry. "It's the first thing that makes me smile each day. That's how I see beauty, Your Grace. Not in the performance, but in the quiet moments when something is simply, authentically, itself." Edmund found himself moving closer, drawn by her words. "What else do you find beautiful?" "Work well done, a clean floor, a perfect seam in linens, bread that rises just right." She smiled, self-deprecating. "Simple things. The satisfaction of knowing your hands created something good. I feel that way in the forests." The admission escaped before he could stop it. "When I ride alone through the estate's woods, away from all the expectations and obligations. That's when I feel most like myself. Then that's where you should spend more time." She said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It's not that easy. I have responsibilities." "Of course you do. I wasn't suggesting you abandon them." Lila adjusted her shawl against the evening breeze, the movement unconsciously graceful. "Only that perhaps you shouldn't abandon yourself entirely in service to them." Edmund watched the moonlight play across her features, the thoughtful set of her mouth, the intelligence in her eyes, the capable hands that had worked all evening without complaint. He noticed the graceful line where her neck met her shoulder, the wisps of dark hair curling against her skin, and felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with duty. He pulled his focus back sharply. This was dangerous territory. The sound of distant music and laughter drifted from the ballroom, a reminder of the world waiting for him, of the 100 women performing their courtship dances while he stood in the garden talking philosophy with a maid. "Edmund," Lady Catherine's voice called from the terrace, high and plaintive. "Edmund, are you out here? You promised me the supper dance." Lila was on her feet immediately. shoes forgotten as she curtsied with practiced precision. The walls came up so quickly it was like watching a door slam shut. "You should return to your guests, Your Grace. They'll be wondering where you've gone." "Miss Harrington, thank you for your kindness, Your Grace. Good evening." Her tone was perfectly proper now. All traces of the woman who'd spoken about roses and bread rising vanished beneath the servant's mask. She retrieved her shoes and disappeared toward the servant's entrance before he could find words to stop her, moving with that same efficient grace he'd noticed earlier. Edmund watched her go, feeling the loss of something he couldn't quite name. "There you are." Lady Catherine appeared at the top of the terrace steps, resplendent in pink silk that caught the moonlight. "I've been searching everywhere. The supper dance is about to begin, and Mother says it's frightfully rude to miss it." Edmund climbed the steps slowly, his cravat still loose around his neck. "My apologies, Lady Catherine. I needed some air." "Oh, I quite understand. It is rather warm inside, isn't it?" She tucked her hand into his arm possessively as they re-entered the ballroom. "But you're here now, and that's what matters. Did you know that Lady Margaret was just telling everyone about her time in Paris? She's so dreadfully pretentious, don't you think?" Edmund made some non-committal sound, his eyes already scanning the ballroom. He caught glimpses of the serving staff moving efficiently through the crowd there, a flash of a black uniform, but not her. There, another servant with a tray, but the wrong height, wrong posture. Where was she? "Your Grace." Lady Vivienne materialized at his elbow as the supper dance ended, her timing impeccable as always. Lady Catherine had been claimed by another partner, leaving him momentarily alone. "You seem distracted this evening." "Do I?" He tried for casual and missed by a mile. Vivienne's dark eyes studied him with unnerving focus. "You keep looking toward the servants' entrance. I do hope everything is to your satisfaction. The staff seems quite competent." There was something in the way she said it, a slight emphasis on the last word, that suggested she'd seen more than he'd realized. Edmund felt heat creep up his neck. "Everything is perfectly satisfactory, Lady Vivienne. I'm glad to hear it." She smiled, and it was dazzling, the kind of smile that had probably launched a dozen courtships. "I was hoping we might have a moment to speak, privately. I have some thoughts about agricultural improvements that might interest you. Lady Margaret mentioned your innovations, and I've done some reading on modern techniques." She was good. Edmund had to give her that. Where Lady Catherine giggled and Lady Margaret interrogated, Vivienne charmed. She made conversation seem effortless, finding topics that engaged him, asking intelligent questions, demonstrating her suitability as a partner in ways both subtle and overt. She would make an excellent duchess. She had all the right qualities, all the proper accomplishments. She understood the game and played it with masterful precision. But even as she spoke about crop rotation and drainage systems, even as she laughed at his jokes and touched his arm with practiced familiarity, Edmund found himself comparing her calculated performance to Lila's unguarded honesty, like selecting a horse based on how it looks in parade rather than how it handles the road. Vivienne was spectacular in parade, but something about the evening's encounter had left Edmund wondering what mattered more, the performance or the truth beneath it. "Your Grace," Vivienne's voice held a note of concern. "You've gone quiet again." "Forgive me." Edmund forced his attention back to her. "It's been a long evening." "Of course. Perhaps you should retire soon. You'll need your energy for the days ahead." Her smile turned, knowing. "After all, you have quite a decision to make." As if he needed the reminder. The night wore on, but Edmund's thoughts kept drifting back to the garden, to a young woman who'd spoken about roses and bread rising and being authentically oneself, to a conversation that had lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but had felt more real than the entire evening of practiced courtship. When he finally retired to his chambers well past midnight, Edmund stood at his window looking out over the moonlit gardens. Somewhere in the servants' quarters below, Lila Harrington was probably already asleep, exhausted from a long night's work, unaware that she'd cracked something open in him that he wasn't sure how to close, or if he even wanted to. Chapter 3. The Seed of Doubt. 2 weeks after the ball, Edmund found himself standing outside the library for the third time that morning, inventing reasons to enter. He'd already taken tea with Lady Catherine, a torturous hour of discussing her watercolors and her mother's prize-winning roses. He'd ridden through the estate with Lady Margaret, who'd spent the entire time critiquing his land management practices with the enthusiasm of a military strategist. And he'd endured an evening of cards with Lady Vivienne, who'd been charming, witty, and so perfectly suitable It made his teeth ache. He was trying. God knew he was trying. But every conversation felt like wading through treacle, and every smile felt painted on. At night, he lay awake thinking not of any of the accomplished women courting him, but of a garden conversation about roses and practicality and being authentically oneself. It was absurd. It was inappropriate. It was consuming him. Edmund pushed open the library door with more force than necessary, prepared to pretend he needed a specific volume on estate management. The excuse died on his lips. Lila Harrington sat curled in the window seat, completely absorbed in a book. Sunlight streamed through the leaded glass, turning the dust motes around her into dancing gold, catching the dark curls that had once again escaped her cap. She tucked her feet beneath her, her practical shoes abandoned on the floor, and her lips moved slightly as she read, forming words, savoring them. She looked utterly at peace. More than that, she looked transported, as if the library and the estate and her station in life had all fallen away, leaving only her and whatever world existed on those pages. Edmund's breath caught. He should leave. He should turn around and walk out before she noticed him, before this became something it shouldn't be. Instead, he stepped inside and closed the door. The soft click made Lila's head snap up. Her eyes widened, and she scrambled to stand, the book tumbling from her lap. "Your Grace." "I didn't. I was just—" She bent to retrieve the fallen volume, trying to hide it behind her back. "I apologize. I know I shouldn't be in here during—" "What are you reading?" Edmund crossed the room before his better judgment could stop him. "Nothing. It's nothing important, Miss Harrington." He kept his voice gentle. "I'm not going to reprimand you for reading. I'm genuinely curious what held your attention so completely you didn't hear me enter." She hesitated. That same internal war he'd seen in the garden playing across her face, propriety versus honesty. Finally, slowly, she held out the book. It was a collection of poetry, the leather binding worn soft with age and handling. Edmund recognized it as one from his father's personal collection, not the formal library. "Wordsworth," he said, surprised. "A former employer taught me to read." The words came out defensive, as if she expected judgment. "Mrs. Blackwood, at my second posting, she said it was a crime that anyone should go through life without books. She taught me letters, then words, then—" Lila's expression softened, lost in memory. "Then she gave me this, said every person should own at least one book that speaks to their soul." "And Wordsworth speaks to yours?" "The poem's about nature, about finding peace in simple things, yes." She met his eyes, and something in her gaze turned fierce, passionate. "He writes about daffodils and lakes and solitary walks, as if they matter as much as grand ballrooms and titles, as if beauty can exist in ordinary places, for ordinary people." Edmund reached for the book, and she handed it to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. He paged through until he found the poem she'd been reading, marked by a frayed ribbon. "Lines written a few miles above Tintern Abbey." He read aloud, that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. "Yes." Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. "Everyone focuses on the grand gestures, the important decisions. But Wordsworth understood that life is built from small moments, the kindness that costs nothing, the love that expects nothing in return." She paused, then added quietly, "The books I was never supposed to read but did anyway." Edmund looked up from the page, struck by the intelligence in her eyes, the thoughtfulness of her interpretation. "I've read this poem a dozen times and never saw it that way. I always focused on the nature imagery, the philosophical musings, but you're right, it's about the small, quiet things that shape us." A smile tugged at her lips. "Perhaps because you've never had to find meaning in small things, Your Grace. When your life is large by design, the grand gestures come naturally. And yours isn't large? My life is exactly the size I've made it, no smaller, no larger." She said it without self-pity, simply stating fact. "Tell me about it," Edmund found himself saying. "Your life, the parts between the poetry and the scrubbing floors." Lila shook her head. "Your Grace, I should return to—" "Please." The word came out more urgently than he'd intended. "I'm asking, not as a duke to a servant, but as someone who'd like to know." Something shifted in her expression, surprise perhaps, or the first crack in her careful walls. She sat back down on the window seat, and Edmund took the chair opposite, the book resting between them like a bridge. The story came slowly at first, then faster as the telling gained momentum. Orphaned at 12 when her mother died of fever, her father disappearing into his grief and debts soon after. 3 households, the first harsh, the second kind, this one fair. Learning to read at 14, discovering a whole world beyond her station. Dreams she'd never spoken aloud, seeing the ocean someday, understanding why poets wrote about it with such longing. Edmund listened and found himself sharing in return. The loneliness of his position, the weight of the Hawthorne name, the feeling that everyone saw the Duke but no one saw Edmund. "I've been surrounded by people my entire life," he admitted, "but I've never felt truly known by anyone." "That's because they're looking at your title, not your face," Lila spoke with unexpected conviction. "It's like reading only the cover of a book and thinking you've understood the story. And you? Do you see my title?" She considered this carefully. "I see both. The title is part of who you are. You can't separate yourself from it any more than I can separate myself from being a maid. But it's not all of who you are. What else do you see? A man who loves his forests more than his ballroom. A man who loosens his cravat the moment he thinks no one's watching. A man who laughed at being compared to a prize bull instead of taking offense." Her eyes held his, a man who's trying very hard to do what everyone expects, even when it's making him miserable. The observation landed like a blow, not painful, but stunning in its accuracy. Edmund stood abruptly, needing to move, and found himself at the bookshelf. He pulled down a volume at random, another poetry collection. "What about this one? Have you read Coleridge?" Lila rose and crossed to stand beside him. Too close, not close enough. Only Kubla Khan. The rhythm of it, the way the words sound like music. "In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure-dome decree," Edmund quoted, pulling the book from the shelf. He opened it, and she leaned in to see the page, her shoulder nearly touching his. "Where Alf, the sacred river, ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea," she continued, her voice soft with wonder. They stood like that, bent over the book together, so close Edmund could smell the simple soap she used, could feel the warmth radiating from her body. The poem swam before his eyes, all his attention focused on the small space between them, charged, electric, dangerous. Their hands moved simultaneously to turn the page. Fingers brushed, neither pulled away. Edmund's breath caught. Leela's lips parted slightly. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they stood frozen, the book forgotten, drawn together by something neither seemed able to name or resist. Then Lila sucked in a sharp breath and stepped back, breaking the spell. I need to return to my duties." Her voice shook slightly. "Mrs. Henderson will be looking for me. Miss Harrington." "Thank you for the conversation, Your Grace." She curtsied quickly, properly, and fled the library before he could find words to stop her. Edmund stood alone among the books, his heart pounding, his hands still tingling from that brief contact. This was spiraling out of control. This was dangerous. This was... "Edmund?" His mother's voice came from the doorway. "I thought I might find you here." He turned, trying to compose his expression into something neutral. "Mother, I was just looking for company?" The Dowager Duchess entered, her shrewd eyes taking in his flushed face, his disarranged cravat, the poetry volume still open on the table. "Lady Vivienne is in the morning room. She mentioned hoping to speak with you about the Harvest Festival." "Of course." Edmund closed the book with more force than necessary. "I'll join her shortly." "Edmund," his mother's voice softened, and she crossed to place a hand on his arm. "I know this isn't easy. Choosing a wife, building alliances, it feels cold, calculated. But these decisions matter, not just for you, but for everyone who depends on us. I know. Your father understood that. When he married me, it wasn't a love match, not at first, but he did his duty, and love came later. More importantly, his marriage secured the alliances that have kept our tenants fed, our lands prosperous, our people safe." She squeezed his arm gently. "You have a good heart, my son, but the world doesn't run on good hearts alone. It runs on strategic marriages and careful alliances and sacrifices that no one will ever thank you for." Edmund thought of his father's deathbed words, the weight of responsibility, the hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on the choices he made. "I understand. Do you?" His mother studied his face for a long moment. "Lady Vivienne is an excellent match, intelligent, accomplished, from a good family. Your father would have approved." Edmund nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mother was right. She was absolutely right. Duty wasn't just about him, it was about tenant farmers and village families and generations of Hawthorns who'd built something worth preserving. But as he left the library to meet with Lady Vivienne, Edmund couldn't shake the memory of Lila's voice reciting poetry, her interpretation of small, nameless acts of kindness, the way her eyes had lit with passion when speaking about words and worlds beyond her reach. And he couldn't shake the terrible, growing certainty that doing his duty might cost him the only person who'd ever truly seen him. Chapter 4. Crossing Lines. 1 month after the ball, Edmund stopped pretending. "Miss Harrington," he said, finding her in the morning room where she was polishing silver, "I require your assistance in the library." Lila looked up, wariness flickering across her features. "Your Grace? A shipment of books has arrived from London. They need cataloguing." The lie sat awkwardly on his tongue, transparent, inadequate. "I thought, given your love of reading, you might enjoy the task." For a long moment, she simply looked at him. He saw the understanding in her eyes, the acknowledgement of what he was really asking. Then, quietly, "Of course, Your Grace. When would you like me to begin?" "Now, if you're able." They both knew what this was. They both knew they shouldn't. But Lila set down her polishing cloth and followed him to the library anyway, and Edmund felt something in his chest ease for the first time in weeks. The books were real, at least 3 crates of volumes from an estate sale. Edmund had purchased them primarily because he couldn't not purchase books, but now they served a purpose beyond his collection. They gave him a reason to be in the same room as Lila for hours at a time, their heads bent together over titles and authors, their hands brushing as they passed volumes back and forth. "Gibbon's Decline and Fall," Lila read from a spine, running her fingers over the worn leather with something like reverence. "I've heard of this. Mrs. Blackwood mentioned it once, said it was essential reading for understanding how great things crumble." "Have you seen many great things crumble?" Edmund asked, watching her face rather than the book. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've seen enough small things fall apart to understand the principle." Over the following days, the careful distance between them eroded like riverbanks in spring flood. The conversations deepened, grew more personal, until Edmund knew the cadence of her voice as well as he knew his own thoughts. Her mother had died of fever when Lila was 10. She remembered the smell of sickness, the helplessness of watching someone fade. Her father had loved her mother desperately, and when she died, something in him broke. He'd drowned his grief in drink and gambling, accumulating debts until he simply vanished one night, leaving 12-year-old Lila alone in a boarding house with 2 shillings and a note that said only, "Forgive me." "I was angry for years," Lila admitted, shelving a volume of Shakespeare with careful precision. "Angry that he chose his pain over my survival. But I understand now some griefs are too large to carry and still function. He couldn't save himself and me both." "So you saved yourself." "I had little choice." She turned to face him, leaning against the bookshelf. "The boarding house keeper found me a position as a scullery maid. The first household was difficult. The master had wandering hands and the mistress blamed me for it. I left after 6 months." Edmund's hands clenched involuntarily. "Did he?" "No. I learned to be invisible, and I left before it could progress further." She said it, matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "The second household was kinder. That's where Mrs. Blackwood taught me to read. She was elderly, her children grown, and I think she was lonely. She'd call me to her sitting room in the evenings, and we'd practice letters. When she died, her children dismissed the staff and sold the house. That's when I came here. 3 years ago. Yes, this has been the best posting I've had. Fair wages, decent quarters, and—" she smiled genuinely now. "Old Martha took me under her wing. She's the head housekeeper, though she claims she's too old for the title. She mothers everyone, but especially me. And there's Annie, just 14, bright as a new penny. I'm teaching her to read, the way Mrs. Blackwood taught me." "You've built a family," Edmund observed quietly. "The only kind I'll likely ever have." Lila pulled another book from the crate, a collection of travel essays. She opened it, and her expression softened with longing. "Sometimes I dream of having a small shop, nothing grand, maybe a bookshop or a haberdashery, something mine, where I'd answer to no one, depend on no one. Just security, independence." Edmund moved to stand beside her, looking at the same page, an essay about the Mediterranean coast. "Is that truly all you want? Security? It's not a small thing when you've never had it." But then she paused, and something vulnerable crossed her face. Though, if I'm being honest, if I could do anything, truly anything, I'd study. History, literature, philosophy, the world beyond what I can see from my window. I want to understand things, not just survive them. The admission seemed to cost her something. Edmund felt the weight of it, the trust implicit in sharing a dream she'd probably never spoken aloud. You already understand more than most educated people I know. You see patterns, connections, meanings that others miss entirely. Because I've had to. Lila closed the book, but kept her fingers pressed against its cover. When you're born to education, you can afford to be careless with it. When you're not, every scrap of knowledge feels precious. Edmund found himself sharing in return confessions he'd never made to anyone. The suffocating weight of inheriting the dukedom at 22, when he was barely more than a boy himself. The way every decision affected not just him but hundreds of tenants, dozens of servants, generations of legacy. The loneliness of being always, Your Grace, never simply Edmund. I don't know if I've ever made a choice for myself, he admitted. Even the things I enjoy reading their approved pastimes for someone of my station. I've never wanted something I was allowed to want, until now. The words hung unspoken between them. They were standing close now, close enough that Edmund could see the flecks of darker grey in her eyes, could count the freckles across her nose that powder would hide if she wore any. The afternoon sun slanted through the library windows, turning everything golden and suspended. There's a volume on the top shelf, Lila said, her voice slightly unsteady. I can't quite reach it. Edmund moved behind her, reaching up for the book she indicated. His chest pressed against her back as he stretched. Their hands met on the spine simultaneously, his covering hers, both of them touching the worn leather. Time suspended. They were both breathing shallowly, the air between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Edmund's other hand settled on her waist, steadying them both, and he felt her sharp intake of breath. He should step back. He should let go. He should remember every reason this was impossible. He didn't move. Neither did she. Your Grace, her voice was barely a whisper. Edmund, hearing his name from her lips, undid something in him. He lowered his forehead to rest against her hair, breathing in the simple soap scent of her, the warmth of her body against his. This cannot happen. Lila's words were gentle but firm. She pulled away, turning to face him, and the loss of contact felt physical. I won't be your amusement before you marry someone appropriate. Edmund stepped back as if struck. Is that what you think you are to me? An amusement? What else can I be? She met his eyes directly, and he saw fear there, and longing, and fierce protectiveness. You have responsibilities, Edmund. A title, tenants, a mother who expects you to marry well. I'm not fool enough to believe in fairy stories where the prince marries the scullery maid. I'm not a prince. I'm a man who... He caught himself, but too late. Who what? Her voice cracked slightly. Who enjoys my company? Who finds me interesting? That's not enough. It will never be enough. In 6 weeks, you'll announce your engagement to Lady Vivienne or Lady Catherine, and I'll still be scrubbing floors. That's reality. What if I don't want that reality? Then you're being selfish. The words were hard, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do you know how many people depend on your advantageous marriage? The alliances it will bring, the dowry that will fund improvements, the political connections that will protect your tenants. Your mother told me once that a duke's marriage isn't personal, it's policy. My mother discussed this with you, not intentionally. She was speaking to Mrs. Henderson, and I overheard. Lila wrapped her arms around herself. She's right, Edmund. You know she is. Whatever this is between us, it's not worth the cost. Before Edmund could respond, voices drifted from the hallway. He recognized his mother's tones, and another, more honeyed voice. Edmund must be in the library, Lady Vivienne was saying. He spends so much time among his books. It's one of the things I admire about him. A man of learning is a rare treasure. Lila moved quickly, efficiently, creating distance. By the time the door opened, she was across the room, properly organizing volumes, every inch the dutiful servant. Edmund, darling. His mother entered with Lady Vivienne on her arm. Lady Vivienne has organized a small gathering this afternoon. I thought you might enjoy attending. Lady Vivienne's smile was warm, calculated, perfect. Just a few close friends for tea and conversation. Nothing formal. I thought we might discuss the upcoming harvest festival. I have some ideas that might interest you. Her eyes flickered briefly to Lila, assessing, then dismissed her as inconsequential. But Edmund saw the slight tightening around her mouth, the way her gaze lingered just a moment too long. She knew, perhaps not the extent of it, but she knew there was something. Of course, Edmund heard himself say, I'd be delighted. The gathering was exactly as promised, intimate, elegant, perfectly orchestrated to showcase Vivienne's suitability. She was witty without being sharp, knowledgeable without being pedantic, charming without being obvious about it. She discussed crop yields and tenant welfare with genuine interest, demonstrating that she'd done her research, that she understood what being a duchess would require. When Lila entered with the tea service, Vivienne barely glanced at her. How fortunate your servants are so well trained, Edmund. One hardly notices them. Something hot and defensive surged in Edmund's chest. One should always notice competence and dignity, regardless of station. The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended. Silence fell across the small gathering. His mother's eyebrows rose. Lady Catherine looked confused. Lady Margaret smirked slightly, and Vivienne's eyes sharpened with understanding. Of course, she said smoothly, as if he'd simply made an academic point rather than issued a challenge. I only meant it as a compliment to your household management. Good servants are indeed invaluable. But her gaze followed Leela as she left the room, and Edmund saw calculation settle over her features like a mask. That evening, his mother summoned him to her private sitting room. I've made a decision, the Dowager Duchess announced without preamble. Or rather, I'm asking you to make one. The summer ball is 6 weeks away. I've narrowed the candidates to 3 finalists: Lady Vivienne Blackwell, Lady Catherine Ashford, and Lady Margaret Thornton. You will court all 3 seriously over the coming weeks, and you will announce your choice at the ball. Edmund felt the walls closing in. Mother, this has gone on long enough, Edmund. Your father has been gone 6 years. The estate needs a duchess. The tenants need to see stability. And you, she softened slightly, you need to move forward with your life. Make your choice. Any of the 3 would be suitable. And if I choose none of them? His mother's expression hardened. That is not an option. You have responsibilities, Edmund. It's time you embraced them fully. After she dismissed him, Edmund stood alone in the darkened hallway, feeling the weight of expectation, duty, and his own impossible desires pressing down until he could barely breathe. 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks to choose a bride, to secure the alliances his estate needed, to do what was expected of him. 6 weeks to stop thinking about grey eyes and borrowed books, and a woman who understood him better than anyone ever had, despite every reason she shouldn't. 6 weeks to forget Lila Harrington. He already knew it was impossible. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. 5 weeks of pretending had nearly killed him. Edmund stood in the blue drawing room, watching Lady Catherine pour tea with the delicate precision of someone who'd been trained since birth for exactly this task. She was discussing the upcoming summer ball, her voice bright and inconsequential as birdsong, and Edmund realized with creeping horror that he couldn't remember a single word she'd said in the past hour. Don't you agree, Your Grace? Lady Catherine smiled at him expectantly, her blue eyes guileless. Absolutely, Edmund replied, having no idea what he was agreeing to. She beamed and continued talking. Something about flowers, or perhaps music. It didn't matter. Nothing she said mattered, because she wasn't Lila. And Edmund was beginning to suspect that nothing would ever matter quite the same way again. He'd tried. God, he'd tried. Rides with Lady Margaret, where she'd discussed political theory with the passion of a military strategist. Dinners with Lady Vivienne, where she'd been charming and intelligent and everything a duchess should be. Afternoon teas with Lady Catherine, who was sweet and pretty and utterly, devastatingly boring. All 3 were suitable. Any of them would make an acceptable duchess. And Edmund felt nothing but the hollow ache of missing someone he'd promised himself he'd forget. The moment Lady Catherine's mother arrived to collect her, Edmund fled. He moved through the house without conscious direction, his feet carrying him to the one place that had always offered solace, the conservatory. The humid warmth hit him as he entered, along with the rich scent of soil and growing things. And there, kneeling among the ferns with her hands deep in earth, was Lila. She looked up, startled, and something crossed her face: joy, then pain, then carefully constructed neutrality. Your Grace, I didn't expect anyone. I'm in love with you, Lila. The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and desperate and true. Lila's hands stilled in the soil, her eyes going wide. Don't say that. Her voice was barely a whisper. Please, don't say that. Why? Edmund moved closer, his heart pounding. Because it makes it real. It's already real. I've tried to stop feeling this way. I've spent 5 weeks courting appropriate women, trying to talk myself out of this. I can't. Lila stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron with methodical precision, her face pale. You think you love me, but you love the escape I represent, the idea of me. In a year, when I'm struggling to learn which fork to use at formal dinners, when your mother won't speak to you and your friends cut you socially, when your political allies withdraw their support, will you love me then? Yes, he said it without hesitation. You can't know that. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-protection. What about the tenant families who depend on the alliances your marriage could bring? Lady Vivian's dowry could fund new cottages, improve drainage in the lower fields. Lady Margaret's family connections could secure favorable trade agreements. What about the village improvements, the school you wanted to build? How will you fund those without a strategic marriage? Edmund flinched. She'd been listening, paying attention to his plans, his dreams for the estate. Of course she had. We'll find another way. Will you? Her voice cracked slightly. Or will you grow to resent me when you see your tenants struggling, knowing you chose your own happiness over their welfare? I won't be responsible for you throwing away everything you are for a fantasy. Don't tell me what I feel. Anger surged through him, not at her, but at the world that made this impossible. And don't pretend you're protecting me when you're protecting yourself from disappointment. The accusation hung between them. Lila's eyes filled with tears, and she didn't wipe them away. Yes, she said quietly. Yes, I'm protecting myself. Because I do love you, Edmund. I've loved you since that night in the garden when you laughed at being compared to a prize bull. I love the way you loosen your cravat the moment you think no one's watching. I love that you quote poetry and mean it, that you see your tenants as people, not property. I love you so much it terrifies me. Edmund's breath caught. Hearing her admission was simultaneously the best and worst thing that had ever happened to him. But it's going to destroy me when you marry Lady Vivian or Lady Catherine, Lila continued, her voice steady despite the tears. At least I'll survive it. I've survived worse. Can you say the same if you throw away your birthright? If you become the Duke who betrayed his family's legacy for a housemaid? I don't care about legacy. You should. The words burst out of her with unexpected force. You think you don't, but you do. I've seen you with your tenants, Edmund. I've watched you take responsibility for their lives, their welfare. That's not obligation, that's love. You love your people, your land, everything your father built. Don't throw it away because I happen to be in the right garden at the right time. The argument was tearing them both apart. Edmund's fists clenched at his sides, every muscle tight with the effort of not reaching for her. Lila's arms remained wrapped around herself, holding the pieces together. Then what do you suggest? Edmund asked, his voice hollow. I marry someone I don't love and pretend you don't exist? Yes. The single word fell between them like a stone. That's exactly what I suggest, because it's the only way forward that doesn't destroy everything you've built. And what about us? There is no us, Your Grace. She used his title deliberately, rebuilding the walls between them. There never was. Just two people who talked in gardens and libraries. Nothing more. They both knew it was a lie. But sometimes lies were all that stood between survival and devastation. I should go, Lila said quietly. I've requested assignment to the East Wing. Mrs. Henderson approved it. We won't. You won't have to see me as often. Edmund wanted to protest, to forbid it, to use his authority to keep her close. Instead, he nodded. If that's what you want, it's what we both need. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Edmund, I think Lady Vivian will make you a good Duchess. She's intelligent, capable, ambitious. She'll help you build everything you dream of building. She's not you. No. Lila's smile was heartbreaking, but perhaps that's for the best. She left before he could respond, disappearing into the house like morning mist, leaving Edmund alone among the ferns and the growing things, surrounded by life while feeling utterly dead inside. The following days passed in a blur of hollow routine. Edmund courted the 3 finalists with grim determination, trying to find something, anything, that might resemble genuine feeling. Lady Catherine was kind. She would make a sweet wife, probably a devoted mother. But her conversation never went deeper than pleasantries, and Edmund found himself mentally composing responses to arguments Lila had made days ago, instead of listening to Catherine's chatter. Lady Margaret was intelligent, sharp as cut glass, but her intelligence was all calculation, no warmth. She discussed their potential marriage as if it were a business merger, which Edmund supposed it was. There was no joy in her, no passion. She would be an efficient duchess and a cold companion. Lady Vivienne was perfect, beautiful, charming, politically astute. She understood what was required of her position and seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the challenges of managing a large estate. She was everything a duchess should be, but Edmund saw the calculation behind every smile, the ambition driving every kind gesture. She would make him a good partner, but he would never truly know her, and she would never truly know him. They would live in the same house, sleep in the same bed, and remain strangers. In the East Wing, Lila threw herself into work with desperate intensity. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, polished silver that already gleamed, volunteered for every unpleasant task that needed doing. Anything to exhaust herself enough that she might sleep without dreaming of library conversations and almost touches. But the tears came anyway, in unexpected moments. While hanging laundry, she'd remember Edmund quoting Wordsworth and have to press her apron to her face to muffle the sobs. While serving dinner, she'd catch a glimpse of him at the table with Lady Vivienne and feel her chest constrict until she could barely breathe. "You're doing the right thing," old Martha told her one evening, finding Lila crying in the servants' hall. The older woman sat beside her, pulling Lila's head onto her shoulder the way she had for 3 years, whenever the world felt too heavy. "Love doesn't feed bellies or keep roofs overhead, child. You've made the practical choice. Then why does it hurt so much? Because you're human. Because he's a good man, and you have a good heart, and sometimes those things aren't enough." Martha stroked her hair gently. "But you'll survive this. You've survived worse." It was exactly what Lila had told Edmund. It didn't make it hurt any less. 3 days before the summer ball, Lila witnessed something that changed everything. She was passing the morning room when she heard crying, soft, muffled, but unmistakable. Lila pushed open the door to find Lady Catherine in tears, her normally cheerful face blotchy and miserable. "Lady Catherine?" Lila approached carefully. "Are you unwell?" "I'm fine," Catherine said automatically, then dissolved into fresh sobs. "No, I'm not fine. I'm utterly humiliated." "What happened?" Between hiccuping breaths, the story emerged. Lady Vivienne had invited Catherine for a walk in the gardens, ostensibly as a gesture of friendship among the finalists. Instead, she'd spent the entire time pointing out Catherine's shortcomings, her frivolous conversation, her lack of political knowledge, her inadequacy as a potential duchess. She'd done it sweetly, with concern in her voice, but the message was clear. Catherine didn't belong here. "She's right," Catherine whispered. "I'm not clever like Lady Margaret or sophisticated like Lady Vivienne. I'm just simple. The Duke must think I'm such a fool." Lila found herself sitting beside the noblewoman, offering her handkerchief, speaking words of comfort she didn't entirely feel. "You're not simple. You're kind. That's not nothing. It's not enough, though, is it?" Before Lila could respond, the door opened. Lady Vivienne stood in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "How touching," Vivienne said, her voice like honey over steel. The maid comforting the competition. Lady Catherine fled, still sniffling. Vivienne closed the door with deliberate care, then turned to face Lila. "Stay away from the Duke and his prospects," Vivienne said quietly. "You're a servant. Act like one." Lila rose, meeting Vivienne's gaze directly. "I've never acted as anything else, my lady, but I won't stand by while someone is cruel, regardless of their station." Something dangerous flickered in Vivienne's eyes. She crossed the room slowly, studying Lila as if seeing her for the first time. "You love him. That's what this is about. You actually love him." Lila said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. "How quaint." Vivienne's smile was sharp. "Does he know?" "It doesn't matter." "Oh, but it does." Vivienne circled Lila like a predator. "Because he loves you too. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, the way he defended you at my gathering. You're not just an obstacle, you're a genuine threat." "I'm no threat to you, Lady Vivienne. He's going to choose you. Everyone knows it. Because you told him to." It wasn't a question. Vivienne was too clever not to have pieced it together. "How noble. How selfless. You've stepped aside for the good of the estate. For the good of Edmund. Same thing, in the end." Vivienne's expression turned almost pitying. "You know, in another world, I might have admired you. But in this one, you're simply in my way. Consider this your warning. Stay in the East Wing. Stay invisible. or I'll make sure your position here becomes untenable." She swept from the room, leaving Leela trembling with anger and fear and helpless grief. That evening, Edmund requested an audience with his mother. "I've made my decision," he announced, the words tasting like ash. "I'll propose to Lady Vivian at the summer ball." The Dowager Duchess's face flooded with relief. "Oh, Edmund, that's wonderful. She'll make an excellent Duchess, intelligent, capable, from a good family. Your father would be so pleased." Edmund nodded mechanically. His father would have been pleased. The tenants would be provided for, the alliances would be secured, everything would work out exactly as it should. He returned to his chambers and stood at the window, looking out over the darkened gardens where he'd first spoken with Lila. Somewhere in the East Wing, she was probably preparing for bed, believing she'd saved him from making a terrible mistake. In 1 week, he would announce his engagement to Lady Vivienne. In 1 week, he would do his duty, honor his father's memory, secure his estate's future. In 1 week, he would destroy the only happiness he'd ever known. Edmund pressed his forehead against the cool glass and tried to convince himself he was doing the right thing. The hollow ache in his chest suggested otherwise. Chapter 6. Vivienne's Web. 3 days before the summer ball, the whispers began. Lila first noticed them in the servants' hall at breakfast. Conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered. Sidelong glances from maids who'd been friendly just yesterday. A subtle shift in the air, like the pressure drop before a storm. "Pay it no mind," old Martha advised, though her expression was troubled. "Idle gossip, nothing more." But it wasn't nothing. By midday, Lila caught fragments of the rumors circulating through the household like poison in the well. Throwing herself at his grace. Can you imagine? Found silk ribbons in her room, far too fine for her wages. Manipulating his kindness, preying on his good nature. Thinks she's better than us now, with her reading and her airs. Lila's chest tightened. She'd been careful, so careful, to maintain proper distance, to never presume. But somehow the truth had been twisted into something ugly, and she had no way to defend herself without confirming there was something to defend. The servants' community fractured before her eyes. Those who'd been jealous of her friendship with Edmund now had permission to express their resentment openly. Others defended her, but their voices grew quieter as the rumors intensified. Even young Annie, whom Lila had been teaching to read every evening, was suddenly absent. Leela found the girl crying in the linen closet. "Annie, what's wrong?" Annie flinched away. "I'm not supposed to talk to you. Mum says that you've been." She couldn't finish, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I told her it wasn't true, that you'd never do anything improper, but she said I was too young to understand how some women manipulate men of station." The words landed like blows. "Annie, I'm sorry, Miss Lila. I have to go." The girl fled, leaving Lila alone among the linens, feeling the walls closing in. That evening, old Martha found her in the East Wing, staring out the narrow window at the gardens below. "This is what happens when we forget our place, child," Martha said quietly, not unkindly. "You were kind to his grace, and he to you, but kindness between a duke and a maid, people will always assume the worst. I've done nothing wrong. I know that. You know that. But truth matters less than appearance in houses like this." Martha's weathered hand squeezed Lila's shoulder. "Keep your head down. In a few days, His Grace will announce his engagement to Lady Vivienne, and this will all blow over." Except it didn't blow over. It intensified. Edmund heard the rumors from his valet, Thomas, who delivered them with the careful neutrality of a man who'd served the Hawthorne family for 20 years. "There's talk below stairs, Your Grace, about Miss Harrington." "What kind of talk?" Edmund's voice was dangerously quiet. Thomas hesitated, then laid out the accusations with clinical precision. By the time he finished, Edmund's hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "It's nonsense," Edmund said flatly. "Miss Harrington is one of the most honest people in this household." "Of course, Your Grace, but the rumors persist." Edmund made the mistake of defending Lila publicly. At dinner that evening, when Lady Margaret made a pointed comment about certain servants who don't know their place, Edmund's response was sharp enough to draw blood. "I found Miss Harrington to be nothing but professional and competent. Anyone suggesting otherwise is engaging in malicious speculation." The silence that followed was deafening. His mother's face tightened. Lady Catherine looked confused. Lady Vivian's expression remained perfectly sympathetic, but Edmund caught the gleam of calculation in her eyes. She was behind this. He knew it with sudden, cold certainty. After dinner, Vivian found him on the terrace, a calculated echo of the night he'd first spoken with Lila. "Edmund, I hope you won't think me presumptuous," she began, her voice gentle with false concern. "But your defense of that maid at dinner, people will talk. Let them talk. Is that wise? When we're about to announce our engagement?" She moved closer, placing a delicate hand on his arm. "I understand you have a kind heart. It's one of the things I admire about you. But you must see how it looks a duke defending a housemaid so vehemently." Edmund pulled his arm away. "What exactly are you suggesting, Lady Vivienne?" "Nothing at all." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Only that perhaps you're too close to the situation to judge it objectively. Let your mother handle household matters. That's what mothers are for." She left him standing in the moonlight, and Edmund felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Vivienne wasn't just manipulating the situation, she was orchestrating it with surgical precision. The next afternoon, Lila was working in the conservatory when Vivienne found her. The lady's timing was impeccable. As always, no other servants nearby, no witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "Miss Harrington." Vivienne's voice was pleasant, cordial. "Might we speak privately?" Lila's hands stilled in the soil. She rose slowly, wiping her palms on her apron. "Of course, my lady." They walked to the garden, to the very spot where Lila and Edmund had first talked. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. "You love him," Vivienne said without preamble. "I can see it in the way you look at him when you think no one's watching. And he loves you, perhaps not wisely, but genuinely." Lila said nothing, her face carefully neutral. "But love isn't enough, is it?" Vivienne continued, her tone almost sympathetic. "You know that. You've told him that. You've done the noble thing, stepped aside for the good of the estate. I actually respect that. Then what do you want, Lady Vivienne?" "I want to offer you a choice." Vivienne's expression hardened slightly. "Leave now, quietly, with a generous sum, enough to start that shop you dream of, build a new life somewhere far from here. Or stay, and I'll ensure you're dismissed without references, branded a thief and a seductress. Your name will be so tarnished no respectable household will employ you." The threat hung in the humid air between them. Lila felt her pulse hammering in her throat, but she kept her voice steady. "I won't be bought, and I won't be threatened. If I'm to be dismissed, let it be for something I actually did." Vivienne's mask of sympathy dropped entirely. "You truly are a fool. You can't win this, Miss Harrington. Even if Edmund chose you, which would destroy his family's standing and impoverish his tenants, you'd make him miserable. In a year, he'd resent you. In 5, he'd hate you. I'm offering you a way to keep your dignity and your future. Take it." "No, as you wish." Vivienne's smile was cold as winter. "Don't say I didn't warn you." She swept from the garden, leaving Lila trembling with anger and fear. The trap sprang that evening. Lady Vivienne appeared in the drawing room where the Dowager Duchess was taking tea, her face pale with distress. "Your Grace, I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I've lost my mother's pearl necklace. It's a family heirloom. I'm devastated." The Dowager immediately summoned the housekeeper. A search was organized. Vivienne was tearful but brave, insisting she didn't want to cause trouble, that surely it had simply been misplaced. "Perhaps we should search the servants' quarters," Mrs. Henderson suggested reluctantly, "just to be thorough." "Oh, I hate to suggest such a thing," Vivienne said, her voice breaking perfectly. "I trust your staff implicitly, but Mother's necklace, it's irreplaceable." The search began systematically, room by room, trunk by trunk. The servants gathered in the hallway, watching with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. When they reached Lila's small room in the east wing, she stood aside calmly, her chin lifted. "Search whatever you need to. I have nothing to hide." Mrs. Henderson opened Lila's trunk, the battered thing that held all her worldly possessions. Beneath her spare uniform and her mother's shawl, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a strand of perfect pearls. The hallway erupted. Gasps, whispers, accusations. "I didn't take it," Lila said, her voice steady despite the blood draining from her face. "I've never stolen anything in my life. Someone put that there." "Miss Harrington," Mrs. Henderson's voice was heavy with disappointment, "I would never have believed it of you." "Because it's not true." Lila's composure finally cracked. "I don't know how it got there, but I didn't take it." "Who else has access to your room?" one of the other maids asked snidely. "Only you, Miss High and Mighty." The scene devolved into chaos, servants arguing, accusing, defending. Lila stood in the center of it, maintaining her dignity even as her world collapsed around her. That's when Edmund arrived, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene with a single glance, Lila pale and shaking, the pearls in Mrs. Henderson's hand, Vivian's perfectly distressed expression. "What's happening here?" His voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Your Grace," Mrs. Henderson began, "I regret to inform you that Lady Vivian's necklace was found in Miss Harrington's possession." "That's impossible. Lila would never steal." "Edmund," his mother appeared behind him, summoned by a servant. Her face was grave. "This is a household matter. Let me handle it." "Mother, I'm telling you, she didn't." "You're too close to this situation to judge objectively," the Dowager said firmly. She turned to Lila, her expression more sorrowful than angry. "Miss Harrington, you'll be confined to your quarters pending a full investigation. Depending on what we find, you may be dismissed without references." "Your Grace, please." Lila's voice finally broke. "I didn't do this." "Then how did my necklace end up in your trunk?" Vivian asked, her voice quavering with hurt. "I don't want to believe it of you, but the evidence." Edmund stepped forward. "Mother, this is wrong. Someone is framing her." "Edmund, enough." The Dowager's voice was sharp. "You're making a spectacle of yourself. This is exactly the kind of behavior that's fueling these unfortunate rumors. Go to your study, now." For a moment, Edmund looked like he might refuse. His eyes met Lila's across the crowded hallway, and she saw his anguish, his fury, his helplessness. She gave a tiny shake of her head. Don't throw everything away for this." Edmund's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "No," his mother agreed. "We'll conduct a thorough investigation. But for now, Miss Harrington, you'll remain in your quarters. Mrs. Henderson, please see to it." Lila walked to her room with her head high, flanked by Mrs. Henderson like a criminal. Behind her, she heard the whispers resume, louder now, vindicated. The door closed. The lock turned. Lila sat on her narrow bed in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the few possessions that defined her small life, and finally let the tears come. Not for herself, but for Edmund, who would blame himself for this, for Annie, who would lose her reading lessons, for the dream of what might have been in a kinder world. Through the thin walls, she could hear the household settling for the night, the normal rhythms of life continuing as if her world hadn't just shattered. In 3 days, Edmund would announce his engagement to Lady Vivian at the summer ball, and Lila would be long gone, dismissed in disgrace, her reputation destroyed so thoroughly she'd never work in a respectable household again. Vivian had won. The realization settled over Lila like a shroud, heavy and suffocating and final. Chapter 7. Truth and Consequences. Edmund didn't sleep. He spent the night pacing his chambers, replaying the evening's events, noting every inconsistency, every detail that didn't align. By dawn, he'd made his decision. His mother had ordered him to stay out of household matters. He was about to disobey her for the first time in his life. "Thomas," he said when his valet arrived to help him dress, "I need your help." Quietly. Thomas's expression remained carefully neutral. "Your Grace?" "The accusations against Miss Harrington. Something isn't right. I need you to ask questions below stairs carefully. Who saw what, when? Find out if anyone noticed anything unusual yesterday." "Your Grace," the Dowager Duchess was quite clear. "I know what my mother said, but I also know Lila Harrington, and she's no thief. Someone is lying, and I intend to find out who." Thomas hesitated only a moment. "Very well, Your Grace. I'll see what I can learn." While Edmund worked above stairs, Lila worked below. Confined to her small room, she refused to surrender to despair. Instead, she pulled out paper and pencil, precious commodities she'd saved for her reading lessons with Annie, and began to write. The letter to old Martha was precise, methodical, detailing her exact movements yesterday. She'd been in the conservatory from morning until noon, the head gardener could confirm it. She'd taken lunch in the servants' hall, at least a dozen people had seen her. She'd spent the afternoon in the East Wing, scrubbing floors with 2 other maids who could vouch for her whereabouts. At no point had she been alone long enough to steal anything, let alone hide it in her own room. The timeline didn't work. "Please, Martha," she wrote, "ask questions. Someone must have seen something. I know Lady Vivian did this, but I need proof." She folded the letter carefully and waited for the key to turn in her lock. When Mrs. Henderson brought her breakfast tray, plain porridge and weak tea, a pointed demotion from the servant's usual fare. Lila pressed the letter into old Martha's hands as she collected the tray from the previous evening. "Please," Lila whispered, "read it. Help me." Martha's weathered face was troubled, but she tucked the letter into her apron and nodded once. By mid-morning, both investigations were bearing fruit. Thomas reported to Edmund in the library, his voice low. "The timeline is impossible, Your Grace. Miss Harrington was accounted for all day. She couldn't have taken the necklace when Lady Vivienne claims it went missing. Did anyone see Vivienne in the servants' quarters? That's where it gets interesting." Thomas glanced toward the door, ensuring privacy. "Several servants noticed her asking questions about Miss Harrington's schedule yesterday morning, and one of the scullery maids, Annie, I believe seemed frightened when I asked if she'd seen anything unusual. Meanwhile, Martha had cornered young Annie in the linen closet, the same place Lila had found her crying days before. "Child," Martha said gently, "I need you to tell me the truth. Did you see something yesterday? Something involving Lady Vivienne?" Annie's eyes filled with tears. "I'll get in trouble." "You're already in trouble if you know something and don't speak. That's called lying by omission." Martha softened her tone. "But if you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be, and you saw something important, telling the truth might help someone innocent." The story tumbled out in fits and starts. Annie had been hiding in the servants' wing. She'd broken a vase and was terrified of being beaten, so she'd hidden in a storage closet. Through the crack in the door, she'd seen Lady Vivienne walking down the hallway, looking around carefully to ensure she was alone. Vivienne had entered Lila's room. Annie was certain it was Lila's because she'd delivered laundry there many times. She'd stayed inside for several minutes, then left quickly, something glinting in her hand as she passed. "Why didn't you say something yesterday?" Martha asked. "Who would believe me?" Annie's voice was small, broken. "I'm nobody. She's a lady. They'd say I was lying, or confused, or trying to help Miss Lila, because she's been teaching me to read." Martha took the girl's trembling hands. "You're not nobody, Annie, and truth is truth, regardless of who speaks it." She brought Annie to Lila's room, where the girl repeated her story haltingly. Lila listened with fierce attention, then pulled Annie into a gentle embrace. "You're so brave," Lila whispered. "Thank you for trusting me with this. Now, when they ask you about it, and they will, here's what you do. Tell the truth simply. Don't embellish, don't guess. Just say exactly what you saw. Can you do that?" Annie nodded, still terrified but bolstered by Lila's confidence in her. Edmund presented his findings to his mother in her private sitting room. The Dowager Duchess listened with growing discomfort as he laid out the timeline, the inconsistencies, Thomas's observations. "And there's a witness," Edmund finished. "A young servant girl who saw Vivienne enter Lila's room yesterday." "A child's word against Lady Vivienne's?" His mother's voice was skeptical, but Edmund heard the first crack in her certainty. "Then let's question Vivienne directly," Edmund pressed. "Let's examine the evidence properly. If you're right, it will only confirm Lila's guilt. But if you're wrong, Mother, we're punishing an innocent woman and rewarding a manipulative one. Can you live with that?" The Dowager Duchess was silent for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. Summon Lady Vivienne and the household staff. If we're going to do this, we'll do it properly." The confrontation took place in the drawing room, with the full household assembled. Vivienne entered, looking puzzled and concerned, her performance already beginning. "Your Grace? Edmund? What's this about?" "Lady Vivienne," Edmund began, his voice formal. "I have some questions about the theft of your necklace." "Of course. I'm happy to help however I can." Her expression was earnest, open. "When exactly did you notice it missing?" "Yesterday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. I was preparing for tea and realized it wasn't in my jewelry case." "And when did you last see it?" "The evening before. I wore it to dinner, then returned it to my case." Edmund nodded. "Can you explain why several servants saw you in the servants' wing yesterday morning, asking questions about Miss Harrington's schedule and whereabouts?" Vivienne's composure flickered, just for a moment. I don't recall being in the servants' wing." "Really? Because 3 different people have confirmed it." Edmund's voice was measured, relentless. "They also noticed you asking about which room was Miss Harrington's." "I may have been looking for Mrs. Henderson." "At 8 in the morning? When Mrs. Henderson is always in the kitchen at that hour?" The room was silent, every eye on Vivienne. Her mask was cracking, small fissures appearing in her perfect facade. "And this necklace," Edmund continued, Why have none of us ever seen you wear it before? It's supposedly a family heirloom, precious beyond measure, yet you've never worn it to any gathering. I was saving it for the engagement announcement. Or you used it because it was valuable enough to make the theft credible, but not so precious you actually cared about it. Edmund took a step closer. Young Annie, would you please tell everyone what you saw yesterday? Annie came forward, shaking but determined. In a quiet voice, she recounted her story: the broken vase, hiding in the closet, seeing Lady Vivienne enter Lila's room and emerge with something in her hand. Vivienne attempted tears, indignation, wounded dignity. This is absurd. The word of a child who's loyal to Miss Harrington because she's been taught to read by her. I found Miss Harrington's door unlocked yesterday. Old Martha spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of decades of service. It's always locked when she's not there. She's careful about such things. But yesterday, it was unlocked. Someone with a master key had been inside. And who has master keys? Edmund asked, though he already knew the answer. Senior household staff, Mrs. Henderson said slowly, and guests of sufficient standing to whom we extend that courtesy for convenience. The servants were murmuring now, their loyalty shifting as the evidence mounted. Even those who'd been quickest to believe the rumors were looking uncertain. Vivienne's composure shattered. She drew herself up, all pretense of tears vanishing, replaced by cold fury. Yes, she said icily. Yes, I did it. And I'd do it again. She's a maid, Edmund, a nobody. And you were going to throw everything away for her: your position, your family's standing, your duties. I was trying to save you from yourself. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. The Dowager Duchess had gone pale. I would have been perfect for you, Vivienne continued, her voice rising. I would have been everything a duchess should be: intelligent, accomplished, politically connected. I would have helped you build an empire. But you couldn't see past your infatuation with the help. That's enough, the Dowager Duchess said, her voice like steel. Edmund had never heard his mother sound so coldly furious. Lady Vivienne, I may be traditional in my views, but I am not unjust. You have betrayed my trust, harmed an innocent woman, and attempted to manipulate my son into marriage through deceit. You will leave this house immediately. Your Grace. Immediately. You will be escorted from the premises, and if I hear you've spread a single word against Miss Harrington's character, I will ensure every respectable household in England knows exactly what kind of woman you are. Vivienne's face twisted with rage, but she saw the finality in the Dowager's expression. She turned to Edmund, making one last attempt. You're a fool. This is what she's made you: weak, irrational, an embarrassment to your name. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret, Edmund said quietly, is that I almost married you. Vivienne swept from the room, her exit dramatic even in defeat. The moment she was gone, the household erupted in conversation: shock, relief, vindication. Miss Harrington, the Dowager Duchess said, her voice carrying over the noise. Please come here. Lila was brought from her room, still pale but composed. She stood before the Dowager with her chin lifted, meeting the older woman's eyes directly. I owe you an apology, the Dowager said, and the admission seemed to cost her something. I made assumptions based on station rather than character. That was wrong. Your name is cleared, your position restored, with the household's full apology. Thank you, Your Grace. Lila's voice was steady, but Edmund saw her hands trembling. The servants dispersed, returning to their duties, but the damage lingered in sidelong glances and whispered conversations. Lila was vindicated, but she was also now the maid the Duke fought for, a curiosity, a scandal, a disruption to the natural order. Edmund found her in her room an hour later, packing her few belongings into her battered trunk. Lila, what are you doing? She didn't look up. I can't stay here, Edmund. Everything is different now. The other servants look at me differently. Your mother looks at me differently. I don't belong anywhere anymore. Then belong with me. Her hands stilled on the worn fabric of her mother's shawl. As what? Your mistress. That's all society will ever see. Edmund crossed the small room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. As my wife, if you'll have me. Lila finally looked up, and he saw fear and longing and desperate hope warring in her grey eyes. You're caught up in the moment, the drama, the vindication. But tomorrow, next week, next year, when the reality sets in, and you're introducing me to Parliament members who remember when I scrubbed their boots, I've spent the last month trying to talk myself out of loving you, Edmund interrupted, his voice fierce. I chose duty. I tried to do the right thing by everyone else's definition. I courted appropriate women. I made plans to propose to someone I didn't love, and I was miserable. The only time I felt truly alive is with you. That's not going to change. What about your tenants, your responsibilities, the alliances? I'm the Duke of Hawthorne. I can make new alliances. I can find other ways to help our people. What I can't do is build a life with someone I don't love, while the woman I do love remains just out of reach. He squeezed her hands gently. I'm not asking you to save me from duty, Lila. I'm asking you to help me redefine what duty means. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm terrified. So am I. You'll be ostracized. Your mother will be horrified. Society can adjust or be damned. Edmund smiled, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. I love you. Marry me. Lila laughed through her tears, the sound broken and beautiful. I love you, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. But Edmund, if we do this when the invitations stop coming, when the tenants whisper, when it gets hard, then we'll face it together. He pulled her close, feeling her melt against him, finally, after so much resistance. I'm not promising it will be easy. I'm promising it will be worth it. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw acceptance, love, and the courage of someone who'd survived far worse than society's disapproval. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Chapter 8. The Public Declaration. The week between Lila's vindication and the summer ball passed in a strange suspension of reality. Edmund courted her properly, walks through the gardens where they'd first talked, afternoons in the library discussing books, meals taken together in the small breakfast room rather than the formal dining hall. He was deliberately, defiantly visible in his affection, as if daring society to object. The Dowager Duchess observed it all with cool politeness. She'd acknowledged her error in judgment regarding Vivienne, but accepting Lila as her future daughter-in-law was another matter entirely. She didn't forbid the courtship, but neither did she bless it. She simply watched, her face an unreadable mask, while Edmund made his choice increasingly clear. The household divided along invisible lines. Old Martha was openly delighted, tears in her eyes whenever she saw Edmund and Lila together. Young Annie had her reading lessons restored and flourished under Lila's attention, but other servants whispered in corners, resentful that one of their own was rising above her station, uncomfortable with the disruption to the natural order. And society was circling like wolves scenting blood. The rumors had spread beyond the estate. Concerned families proposed new candidates, suitable young women who might redirect the Duke's unfortunate infatuation. Letters arrived daily from Edmund's political allies, expressing worry about his judgment. The pressure to reconsider was relentless, suffocating. Through it all, Edmund remained steady. Let them talk, he told Lila when she expressed concern. In a week, they'll have something new to gossip about. They'll have us to gossip about, Lila replied quietly. Then we'll give them something worth the gossip. Now, standing at the entrance to the ballroom for the summer ball, Lila felt the weight of every eye in the room. She wore a gown Edmund had insisted on sage green silk that brought out her eyes, simple but elegant. It was the finest thing she'd ever worn, and it felt like a costume, a performance of a role she didn't know how to play. I don't belong here, she whispered to Edmund as they paused at the threshold. You belong with me, he replied firmly. That's all that matters. But as they entered, Lila felt the immediate shift in atmosphere. Conversations faltered, eyes tracked their movement. She was no longer invisible as a servant, but she wasn't accepted as an equal either. She existed in some uncomfortable liminal space, and every person in the room seemed acutely aware of it. Lady Catherine approached first, surprisingly gracious. Miss Harrington, what a lovely gown. The color suits you beautifully. Thank you, Lady Catherine. Lila managed a smile, grateful for the kindness. I hope you'll be very happy, Catherine continued, and seemed to mean it. Edmund is a good man. He deserves someone who sees him, not just his title. Lady Margaret was more reserved but equally civil. Miss Harrington, I understand congratulations are in order, though I confess I'm surprised by the Duke's choice. Her tone was analytical rather than cruel. Still, I suppose there's something to be said for choosing passion over practicality. I wish you both well. But not everyone was so generous. Clusters of noblewomen whispered behind fans, their gazes sharp with disapproval. An elderly duchess turned her back entirely when Edmund tried to make introductions. 2 families left within the first hour, making their displeasure evident. Yet there were others, younger couples mostly, who seemed intrigued by the unconventional romance. A few smiled warmly at Leela, as if her presence represented some kind of hope that love might triumph over duty in their own lives. At the margins of the ballroom, the servants watched with mixed reactions. Some wiped tears, clearly moved. Others stood rigid with disapproval, as if Lila's elevation was a personal betrayal of their shared position. Edmund had planned to propose to Lila privately in the garden, then announce their engagement to the assembled guests. But fate, as always, had other plans. Lady Helena Ashford, Catherine's mother, and a woman of considerable social influence, approached Edmund with a purposeful stride. Beside her was a young woman Lila didn't recognize, golden-haired and exquisitely dressed. "Edmund, my dear boy," Lady Helena's voice carried across the nearby conversations. "I don't believe you've met my youngest daughter, Arabella. She was just presented at court last month." The girl curtsied beautifully, her smile practiced and perfect. Lady Helena continued, her tone kind but firm. "Edmund, you're a good man with a generous heart, but don't throw your life away on a momentary passion. Real love can grow in a proper marriage. I've seen it happen countless times. Arabella would make you an excellent duchess. She's been trained for the role since birth." The surrounding conversations died completely. Every ear in the ballroom strained to hear Edmund's response. This was the moment the easy path laid out before him, endorsed by tradition and society, offering him escape from the scandal of marrying beneath his station. Edmund felt the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. He could end this now. Accept Lady Helena's offer, court Arabella, make a suitable match that would please his mother and satisfy society's demands. Everything would go back to normal, the path forward clear and uncomplicated. He looked across the ballroom to where Lila stood near the refreshment table. She'd insisted on serving, unable to completely abandon her identity even in her fine dress. "I haven't forgotten who I am," she'd told him earlier, and he'd seen both pride and fear in her eyes. As he watched, an elderly nobleman gestured dismissively toward her, clearly ordering her to fetch him champagne. Lila's face remained composed, dignified, not engaging with the rudeness but not cowering either. She simply redirected him to one of the actual servants with quiet grace, then stepped back into the shadows. In that moment, Edmund saw everything he loved about her, her strength, her integrity, her refusal to pretend to be something she wasn't. She wasn't performing for society. She was simply being herself. And that took more courage than any of these guests would ever know. "Lady Helena," Edmund said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "I appreciate your concern and your kindness, but I'm afraid I must decline." He walked away from the easy path, crossing the ballroom with deliberate steps. Conversations ceased entirely. The orchestra faltered mid-phrase. Every eye followed him as he made his way to Lila. She looked up, startled, as he approached. "Edmund, what are you?" He took her hand, and the ballroom collectively inhaled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edmund announced, his voice steady and clear, "if I might have your attention." The silence was absolute. Even the servants along the walls stood frozen, watching. "I know you've come tonight expecting an announcement," Edmund continued. "Many of you have been kind enough to suggest suitable matches to remind me of my duties and obligations. My mother, my advisors, my friends all have offered counsel on choosing a wife who would strengthen alliances, increase wealth, secure political advantage." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some disapproving, all waiting. "My father taught me that duty was paramount, that the Hawthorne name meant something, that every choice I made would affect hundreds of lives." He was right. "But my father also taught me that true nobility lies in character, not birth, in integrity, not title, in the choices we make when it would be easier to choose otherwise." Edmund tightened his grip on Lila's hand. She was trembling, but she didn't pull away. "I've spent the past months courting appropriate women, trying to make the rational choice, attempting to do what everyone expected of me, and I was miserable, empty, going through motions while feeling nothing." His voice roughened with emotion. "I've learned that there's nothing rational about love, and nothing more important." He turned to face Lila directly now, speaking to her though his words carried to everyone. "Miss Lila Harrington has shown me what true worth means. She has never asked for anything from me, never sought to elevate herself. She has only been honest, kind, and true. She reads poetry because it speaks to her soul. She teaches servant girls to read because she believes knowledge should belong to everyone. She tends gardens and finds beauty in small, quiet things. She sees me not the Duke, not the title, but Edmund, just Edmund. Tears were streaming down Lila's face now, but she was smiling. Edmund dropped to one knee, and the ballroom erupted in gasps and whispers. "Will you marry me, Lila? Will you help me build a life where duty and love aren't opposing forces but work together, where we can honor our responsibilities while being true to ourselves?" For a moment, Lila couldn't speak. She looked at Edmund kneeling before her, at the hundreds of faces watching with judgment or fascination or hope. She thought of everything this choice would cost them, both the social ostracism, the lost alliances, the endless scrutiny. Then she thought of library conversations and garden walks and being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger. "Yes, though I don't know how to be a duchess." Edmund stood, pulling her into his arms. "Then we'll learn together." He kissed her, right there in the middle of the ballroom, and the room exploded into chaos. Some guests stood and left immediately, their faces twisted with scandal and disapproval. The sound of departing carriages began almost instantly, a steady stream of protest. Others remained but whispered furiously behind fans, the gossip spreading like wildfire through the room. But some, a surprising number, smiled. A few younger women wiped tears. One gentleman began to applaud, and others slowly joined, until a scattered, uncertain ovation rippled through those who remained. The servants' reactions were equally divided. Old Martha stood at the servants' entrance, openly crying, her weathered face radiant with joy. Young Annie bounced on her toes, beaming, but others stood rigid with disapproval or confusion, their world order fundamentally disrupted. All eyes turned to the Dowager Duchess. She sat in her chair, face unreadable, while her son held a housemaid in his arms, and half the ballroom departed in protest. The moment stretched, taut as a wire, everyone waiting to see which way she would fall. Finally, slowly, the Dowager stood. The room held its collective breath. She looked at Edmund and Lila for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded once. Not approval, not yet, perhaps not ever fully, but acknowledgement, acceptance of what could not be changed. She didn't approach them. She didn't embrace Lila or offer congratulations. But she didn't leave the ballroom either, and that itself was a statement. Her continued presence gave permission for others to stay, to accept, to move forward. It wasn't the blessing Edmund had hoped for, but it wasn't rejection. It was a beginning. Someone mentioned that Lady Vivian had left for the continent, fleeing the scandal of her own exposure. Her absence was both a relief and a reminder there would always be opposition, always those who saw their love as transgression rather than triumph. But as Edmund and Lila stood together in the center of the ballroom, hands clasped, facing the mixed reactions with equal parts fear and determination, they knew they'd already won the only battle that mattered. They'd chosen each other. Edmund led Lila toward the exit, not fleeing but departing with dignity. As they passed the servants' entrance, Lila looked back one last time. Old Martha stood there, wiping her eyes, her face creased with joy and sorrow and pride. She nodded a blessing, a goodbye to who Lila had been, a welcome to who she was becoming. Lila nodded back, tears blurring her vision. Behind them, the ball continued, diminished, divided, but continuing. Ahead of them stretched uncertainty, challenge, a future that would require them to be braver than they'd ever imagined. But they were facing it together, hand in hand, and that made all the difference. The ballroom doors closed behind them, and Edmund pulled Lila close, pressing his forehead to hers. "No going back now," he whispered. "No going back," she agreed, and stepped forward into their uncertain, terrifying, beautiful future. Chapter 9. A New Beginning. The morning light filtering through the guest chamber windows felt different, somehow softer, more golden, as if the world itself knew this was a day of transformation. Lila sat alone in the room that had been hers for the past 6 weeks, no longer in the servants' quarters but not yet in the family wing. A liminal space, like everything about her existence lately. On the bed lay her wedding dress, ivory silk with delicate lace at the sleeves, beautiful but not ostentatious. She'd chosen simpler elegance over grandeur, unable to quite imagine herself in anything too elaborate. "What am I doing?" the question whispered through her mind, not for the first time. She was gaining so much love, security, education, opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. the ability to help others, to create change, to build something meaningful beside a man who saw her truly. But she was losing too. The simplicity of her old life, where her place was certain even if it was small, her community among the servants, already fractured by her elevation, the comfort of knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged. Old Martha's words from the night before echoed in her mind. "You'll always be our Lila, child. Just a Lila with a bigger responsibility now." A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young woman entered Marie, the lady's maid Edmund had assigned to help her prepare. The irony wasn't lost on Lila. She knew more about being a lady's maid than how to be attended by one. "Good morning, Miss Harrington," Marie said cheerfully. "Shall we begin with your hair?" Lila had initially insisted on doing it herself, her hands moving through the familiar motions of pinning and arranging, but the elaborate style required for a ducal wedding was beyond her skill, and she'd finally, reluctantly, sat still and let Marie work. It was harder than it should have been, learning to receive care rather than give it, accepting help rather than being the helper. But as Marie's skilled fingers wove her hair into an elegant arrangement, Lila forced herself to breathe, to accept, to begin the long process of learning her new role. The wedding dress slipped over her head like a dream, the silk whispering against her skin. It fit perfectly. Edmund had insisted on the finest dressmaker, had sat through her fittings with patient attention, offering opinions when asked, and silent support when she was overwhelmed. Marie fastened the tiny buttons up her back, and Lila caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged in grand ballrooms and formal portraits, someone who could stand beside a duke without seeming absurd. She still didn't quite believe it. In his chambers across the estate, Edmund was having his own moment of doubt. "What if I'm asking too much of her?" he said quietly as Thomas helped him into his formal coat. "What if this life, the scrutiny, the expectations, the cruelty of society, what if it breaks her?" Thomas, who'd served the Hawthorne family for 2 decades and said little but saw everything, paused in his work. "Your Grace, if I may speak plainly, please. You're giving her a choice. That's more than most people get, noble or common. She knows what she's choosing. Trust her to be strong enough to choose it." Edmund nodded, drawing strength from the simple wisdom. Lila was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. She'd survived poverty, loss, cruelty. She could survive this too, and unlike those other trials, she wouldn't face it alone. The ceremony was held in the estate's private chapel, a deliberate choice. Edmund had refused the grand cathedral wedding his mother had suggested, refused the spectacle that would have drawn crowds of curious onlookers. This was intimate, genuine, for them. The guests were few. Roughly half the families who'd attended the summer ball had come a stark reminder of the social cost of their choice. Empty pews where influential nobles should have sat spoke volumes about the bridges they'd burned. But those who had come seemed genuinely pleased. Lady Catherine sat near the front, her kind face beaming. Lady Margaret was there too, her expression thoughtful rather than disapproving, and in the very front row, in seats traditionally reserved for family, sat old Martha and young Annie, both in their finest dresses, both crying happy tears. The servants lined the back of the chapel, another break with tradition, but Edmund had insisted. "Lila's family is here," he told his mother firmly. "They will be welcomed." The Dowager Duchess arrived late, and for a terrible moment, Lila feared she wouldn't come at all. But then she swept into the small antechamber where Lila was waiting, and in her hands was a velvet box. "Your Grace," Lila curtsied, still uncertain how to address her future mother-in-law. "Stop that," the Dowager said, not unkindly. "We're about to be family. Formality seems excessive." She opened the box to reveal a necklace, sapphires set in silver, clearly ancient, clearly precious. "This is the Hawthorne necklace. It's been given to every Duchess of Hawthorne for 6 generations. Lila's breath caught. "I couldn't possibly." "You can. You must." The Dowager stepped forward and fastened the necklace around Lila's throat. The weight of it was substantial: history, responsibility, acceptance, all at once. "I won't pretend to understand my son's choice, but I see that you love him truly, not for his title or his wealth. That is rare and precious." Tears pricked Lila's eyes. "I'll try to be worthy of the trust he's placed in me. And yours." The Dowager's expression softened in a way Lila had never seen. "You already are. I was simply too blind to see it. My son sees clearly where I was, clouded by tradition." She paused, then added quietly, "Teach me to see clearly too. In time." It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was genuine, the beginning of actual acceptance, hard-won and all the more meaningful for it. The ceremony itself was simple and profound. Edmund and Lila had written their vows together, sitting late into the night with quill and paper, trying to capture everything they wanted to promise each other. Edmund's voice was steady as he spoke. "I promise to honor you always, to see you truly not as the world sees you, but as you are. I promise to build a life where love matters more than lineage, where we can be partners in all things." Lila's hands trembled as she replied, "I promise to stand beside you as an equal, to grow with you, to help you be the man and duke you wish to be. I promise to never forget where I came from, and to use where I'm going to help others rise." When they kissed, sealing their promises, the chapel erupted in applause, mostly from the servants in the back, their joy unrestrained and genuine. The reception revealed the complicated reality of their new life. Some noble guests attended stiffly, fulfilling social obligation, but making their reservations clear through cold politeness. Others were genuinely warm, intrigued by the love story, perhaps seeing hope for their own unconventional desires. The servants celebrated openly, their presence at the reception another deliberate break with tradition. They saw one of their own elevated and felt, perhaps for the first time, that the rigid boundaries of class might be more permeable than they'd believed. Young Annie approached shyly, pressing something into Lila's hand. "I made this for you, Miss, I mean, Your Grace." "Just Lila," Lila said gently. "To you, always just Lila." It was a bookmark, carefully embroidered with flowers, and the words, "So you never stop reading." Lila pulled the girl into a fierce hug, not caring who saw, not caring about propriety. Not everything was joyful. At one point, Lila overheard a nobleman mutter to his companion, "Elevation through seduction, tale as old as time." Before Lila could react, Edmund was there, his voice cold as winter. "Lord Pemberton, I believe you have something to say to my wife. An apology, perhaps, for your unconscionable rudeness." The man paled, stammered an apology, and fled. Edmund's message was clear. Lila would be protected, respected, or those who couldn't manage it would no longer be welcome. During his wedding speech, Edmund surprised everyone by announcing changes to the estate's practices, improved wages for workers, better living conditions in the servants' quarters, and most significantly, a school to be established for servants' children, boys and girls, both where they could learn to read, write, and perhaps dream of futures beyond service. "Lila has shown me that potential exists everywhere, regardless of birth," he said, his hand finding hers on the table. "I intend to help nurture it. We intend to help nurture it." When Lila stood to speak, the room quieted with curiosity. "I don't pretend to have been born to this role," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But I've spent my life learning, working, growing. I won't stop now. I hope to earn your respect, in time. And for those who cannot give it, I understand. Change is difficult, but I promise to honor this position, to serve our people well, and to never forget where I came from." Her dignity and humility won over even some skeptics. It was impossible not to admire her grace under pressure, her refusal to pretend she was something she wasn't. As the reception wound down, Lila slipped away to the servants' quarters one last time. Her old room stood empty, waiting to be reassigned. She stood in the doorway, breathing in the familiar scent: simple soap, worn wood, the faint mustiness of old linens. Her books were already packed, along with her mother's shawl, the only possessions she was taking from this life into the next. Everything else would stay, would be used by whoever came after. Old Martha found her there, crying quietly among the ghosts of who she'd been. "I'll miss our morning tea chats," Lila whispered, clinging to the older woman. "You'll be too busy for an old woman now," Martha said, but her voice was thick with emotion. "Never. Your family. That doesn't change." Lila pulled back, looking into Martha's weathered face. "Promise me you'll still scold me when I need it. Promise me that doesn't change." "Oh, child," Martha cupped Lila's face gently. "Some things never change. I'll still be here, still drinking tea too strong and watching the sun rise, and you'll always have a place in my heart, Duchess or no." Edmund appeared in the doorway, and Martha tactfully withdrew. He came to stand beside Lila, looking around the small room that had been her world. "You're allowed to mourn what you're losing," he said quietly, "even while gaining something else. I'm not sorry, Lila said quickly. It's a lot of change. We'll face it together. All of it. The good and the difficult. He took her hand, and they walked together to the ducal chambers, her new home, their shared future. The rooms were vast compared to her old quarters, luxurious beyond anything she'd imagined. Edmund led her to the window, and they stood together looking out over the moonlit estate. It's beautiful, Lila breathed, and terrifying. We'll make it ours, Edmund promised. Not my father's legacy or my mother's traditions, but ours. We'll keep what works and change what doesn't. They talked late into the night, making plans. Lila would continue teaching servants to read. Edmund would modernize estate practices, improve workers' conditions. Together, they would try to build something better than what they'd inherited. At one point, Edmund pulled her to her feet. You'll need to know formal dances. Let me teach you. They moved through the steps, Lila stumbling, Edmund patient. When she stepped on his foot for the third time, they both dissolved into laughter, the tension breaking into something lighter, more joyful. I'm hopeless, Lila said, still giggling. You're learning. There's a difference. They collapsed onto the settee, breathless and happy. Lila looked at Edmund, her husband, her partner, her impossible, improbable future, and felt the weight of everything they'd overcome and everything still ahead. I'm still terrified, you know, she admitted quietly. So am I. Edmund pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. But I'd rather be terrified with you than comfortable without you. Even when I step on your feet during the first formal ball, especially then. Lila tilted her face up, and he kissed her properly, soft, sweet, full of promise. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. We're going to make mistakes, she whispered. Undoubtedly. People will judge us. Let them. It's going to be hard. Yes. Edmund's arms tightened around her. But it will also be beautiful. We'll make it beautiful. Outside, the estate settled into sleep. The servants in their quarters, the nobles in their distant homes, the Dowager Duchess in her wing, all of them adjusting to this new reality where a maid had become a duchess and love had trumped tradition. Inside the ducal chambers, Edmund and Lila sat together in the window seat, watching the stars emerge, talking about books and gardens and dreams for the future. They were still learning, still adjusting, still terrified of all the ways they might fail, but they were doing it together, and that made all the difference. The story of the Duke and the maid would be told for generations, sometimes as scandal, sometimes as romance, sometimes as cautionary tale. But for Edmund and Lila, it was simply the beginning of their life together. Imperfect, uncertain, hard-won, and real. And absolutely, undeniably, worth it. And so, Edmund and Lila began their new life together, not as duke and servant, but as partners who chose love over convention, courage over comfort, and each other over everything else the world expected of them. Their journey wasn't easy. Society didn't transform overnight, and there were struggles ahead, whispers that would follow them for years, relationships that would never quite mend, moments when the weight of their choice would feel almost too heavy to bear. But they faced it all together, hand in hand, building something beautiful from the broken pieces of expectation. Lila never forgot where she came from. She continued teaching servants to read, established the school Edmund had promised, and used her position to open doors that had always been closed to people like her. And Edmund learned that true nobility isn't inherited, it's earned through the choices we make and the people we choose to become. As for the Dowager Duchess, well, that's a story for another time. Let's just say that even the most traditional hearts can learn to see clearly, given time and a daughter-in-law with patience and grace. If Edmund and Lila's story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between duty and desire, between what others expected and what your heart truly wanted? Share your story. I read every single comment, and your experiences inspire the stories I create. If you enjoyed this tale of forbidden love and second chances, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people discover these stories and reminds me that you want more content like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. I post fresh historical romances every week, each one exploring love that defies expectations, characters who choose courage over conformity, and endings that prove that sometimes the heart knows better than society ever could. Which story should I tell next? I'm working on several new tales. Would you prefer another Victorian romance? Perhaps a Regency-era love story? Or maybe something set in the Georgian period? Let me know in the comments, and your votes will help decide what comes next. And if you're craving more stories right now, check out the playlist I've linked in the description below. Hours of historical romances featuring strong heroines, swoon-worthy heroes, and love stories that triumph against all odds. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of true love, who understands that real worth has nothing to do with titles or birth, who needs to be reminded that choosing your own path even when it's terrifying is always worth it. Thank you so much for listening, for supporting this channel, and for joining Edmund and Lila on their journey from the ballroom to forever. Your presence here means the world to me. Until next time, dear listeners, may you always have the courage to choose love, the strength to choose yourself, and the wisdom to know that the best stories are the ones where we write our own endings. This is Lyra, and I'll see you in the next story. Sweet dreams, and may your own love story be as brave and beautiful as the ones we share here.